On the previous slide, I mentioned that the vowel sounds ah and e have very different formant signatures, and that's not by accident. And I thought it would be worth digging into why that is, since that would give us a good opportunity to talk about the relationship between F1 and F2 in vowel sounds and tongue placement. I'm going to see if I can put each of these vowel sounds on an LPC spectrum so we can make some observations. E, ah. Okay, in the red template line, we have E. In the blue wave, we have ah. So just looking at the first two formants, very clearly we see that the E in red has a low formant 1 and a high formant 2, and we see the opposite for the first two formants of ah. So in other words, they have diametrically different, relative to each other, formant locations for F1 and F2. These vowel sounds also are diametrically different in where they are, if you look at the vowel quadrilateral. Ah is produced with the tongue at the back of the oral cavity and low against the bottom of the mouth. E is produced with the tongue high against the roof of the mouth or near the roof of the mouth and forward in the front of the oral cavity. So the reason these two things are directly related, the locations of F1 and F2 and the placement, the placement of the tongue during articulation for these vowel sounds, is because of all the different characteristics of the vocal tract that affect formant locations for F1 and F2 for vowel sounds, tongue placement is by far the most meaningful. So specifically, a low tongue place results in a high F1. A high tongue place results in a low F1. So let's just talk about tongue height for the moment, and let's just think about F1 for the moment. So we see that in terms of tongue height, E, the E sound, has a high tongue height, and ah has a low tongue height. E has a low F1, ah has a high F1. One thing we can actually do is add another dimension to the exact same visualization that we use for the vowel quadrilateral on the y-axis, where what was representing a highness in tongue height in terms of the placement for a particular vowel sound can also be used to represent low frequency for F1. So in other words, not just E, which is produced with a high tongue position, has a low F1, but that actually applies to all vowel sounds that are produced with a high tongue height, and vice versa for low in terms of F1. You may have guessed where this is going, but F2 is predominantly determined by advancement of tongue. So E is produced with a advanced frontward placement of the tongue, and it also has a high F2. Ah is produced with the tongue in the back, and it has a low F2. Just like we said, E has a high F2, ah has a low F2.